Hey everyone, welcome back to the Crime Whisper today. We're diving into another chilling tale straight from the heart of Los Angeles. Los Angeles, a city where dreams are made and sometimes shattered. Behind the bright lights of Hollywood and the sun-soaked boulevards lies a darker side, a world of crime, betrayal, and secrets buried in the shadows of palm trees and neon lights. Tonight's story begins on a quiet street in East LA, where a single gunshot echoed through the night, setting off a chain of events that would uncover one of the most twisted cases in the city's history. Los Angeles has always been a city of contrasts for some. It is the land of opportunity, the golden dream, where people come chasing stardom and success for others. It is a battlefield, where survival depends on how well you navigate the blurred lines between glamour and crime. Behind the iconic skyline and the glimmering lights of Hollywood, the underworld thrives. Hidden in plain sight, our story begins in the spring of 2017, in East Los Angeles on the night of April 12th. Residents of a quiet residential block were startled awake by the sound of gunfire. A single shot cracked through the darkness, followed by silence so heavy that even the stray dogs in the alley froze. The call to 911 came in at 11:47 p.m. A neighbor reported a man lying face down near a blue Honda Accord, blood pooling on the pavement beneath him. The victim was later identified as Victor Delgado, a 29-year-old small-time mechanic with a checkered past. At first glance, it seemed like a routine gang-related shooting. Delgado had once been loosely affiliated with a local street crew, the Evergreen Kings, though he had reportedly left that life behind years earlier. He was known now as a quiet man, trying to rebuild his life working odd jobs, renting a small apartment, and keeping his distance from trouble. But detectives arriving at the scene noticed something unusual. There were no shell casings nearby, suggesting the shooter had used a revolver or had carefully picked up the evidence. The victim's wallet and phone were missing, which pointed to a robbery. But there were no signs of struggle. Delgado had been shot execution style, one bullet directly to the back of the head. This was no random mugging. The first threads of mystery homicide detective Carla Mendoza, a veteran of the LAPD with 15 years of service, was assigned the case. She had worked everything from domestic disputes turned deadly to cartel-linked murders. But something about this scene unsettled her. It was too clean. She later recalled in interviews the kind of crime that tells you someone wanted Victor gone, not just robbed. The preliminary investigation uncovered a chilling detail. Hours before his death, Delgado had received multiple phone calls from an unknown number. Phone records later showed it was a burner phone purchased the same day at a corner store in Boyle Heights. Whoever had lured him out that night didn't want to be Instincts told her this was just the beginning. A city built on secrets. To understand this case, you have to understand Los Angeles itself. For decades, the city has been a hub for organized crime, from old-school mobsters who once controlled the gambling rings in Hollywood, to the powerful street gangs of South Central, to modern-day cartels using the city as a pipeline for drugs and money laundering. Crime here has always adapted with the times. Delgado's murder would eventually expose connections stretching far beyond one man's death. But on that April night, the police only had fragments: a dead mechanic, a missing phone, and neighbors too afraid to talk. The victim, Victor Delgado, wasn't a saint. His rap sheet included petty theft, minor drug charges, and a probation violation. But for the past 3 years, he seemed to have left that life behind. His landlord described him as quiet, always paid on time. His younger sister, Marisol, insisted he had turned over a new leaf. He was done with the gangs. She told detectives he just wanted to fix cars, stay out of trouble. He was trying to help me raise my son. But as investigators dug deeper, they discovered Delgado had recently become entangled in something far bigger than petty crime. 2 weeks before his death, he had been questioned by federal agents in connection to a money laundering probe targeting a local car dealership. Delgado wasn't charged, but his name appeared in financial records that tied the dealership to suspected cartel activity. Had Delgado seen something he wasn't supposed to? Pressure from the top. The LAPD homicide unit was already stretched thin that spring. Los Angeles was experiencing a surge in violent crime. Shootings were up 15% compared to the previous year. The media was pressing the department for answers, and Delgado's murder quickly became one of dozens on their desks. But when the FBI quietly contacted Detective Mendoza about the case, she knew it was no ordinary homicide. Federal agents hinted that Delgado might have been an unwitting link in a larger chain involving drug shipments, fake car sales, and offshore accounts, and, if that was true, then his murder wasn't just about silencing a witness, it was about protecting an shadowy figure emerges. Witness canvassing produced a single lead. A neighbor across the street claimed he saw a man in a dark hoodie standing near Delgado's car, about 10 minutes before the gunshot. The witness couldn't make out the face, but he recalled something odd. The man wasn't nervous, he was calm. Almost waiting. Security footage from a liquor store 2 blocks away later captured a black Chevrolet Tahoe driving away around midnight. The SUV's plates were stolen through fragments of evidence and scraps of testimony. A shadowy figure began to take shape, someone meticulous, patient, and professional, not the kind of street criminal who acted on impulse, but someone who planned every move. The case takes shape by the end of April. Detective Mendoza had pieced together a preliminary theory. Delgado wasn't just in the wrong place at the wrong time, he was deliberately targeted, possibly for what he knew about the laundering scheme. But there was one thing that didn't make sense. Why would a small-time mechanic be valuable enough to kill? The answer to that question would drag investigators into a labyrinth of deceit, where drug cartels, corrupt businessmen, and even law enforcement officers themselves were caught in a deadly dance of power and, for the people of Los Angeles. The Delgado case was just the first tremor of a storm about to break. Detective Carla Mendoza stared at the crime board in her office. The white surface crowded with photographs, scribbled notes, and red string tying fragments of evidence together. At the center sat the face of Victor Delgado, eyes frozen in a permanent stare around him. Blurry liquor store footage, a printout of the dealership's financial transactions, and a small sticky note that read only 2 words: cartel link. Cases like this had a way of eating at her. Most homicides, grim as they were, had a straightforward rhythm: motive, weapon, opportunity. But Delgado's murder felt like smoke, real, present, but impossible to grab hold of. Whispers in the shadows. The dealership connection couldn't be ignored. Records showed Delgado had worked on cars for Sunset Imports, a mid-tier dealership along Pico Boulevard. On paper, it specialized in used luxury vehicles, but according to federal agents, Sunset Imports had been flagged for suspicious cash transactions and vehicle shipments that didn't add up. Cars were being bought and sold with inflated invoices, some shipped overseas to phantom buyers. Money laundering through cars wasn't new, it was clean, profitable, and hard to trace. What caught Mendoza's attention was that Delgado's name appeared on service records tied to vehicles later. Flagged in the federal probe, he wasn't just changing oil. An FBI agent told her he was either helping them move vehicles, or he stumbled into something he wasn't supposed to see. Mendoza asked the natural question: if he was a loose end, who decided to cut him off? A visit to Sunset Imports 2 days later. Mendoza walked into Sunset Imports. The place smelled of waxed leather and cheap cologne. Behind polished glass windows sat rows of imported cars: BMW, Audis, and Mercedes-Benzes, lined up like soldiers ready for parade. The owner, Daniel Rivas, was a charismatic man in his early 40s. He greeted Mendoza with a salesman's smile that didn't reach his eyes. His tailored suit and slicked back hair made him look more like a Hollywood agent than a car dealer. I already spoke to the feds, Rivas said smoothly. When she mentioned Delgado's name, the kid worked here off and on, fixing up junkers. Nice guy. Quiet. I was as shocked as anyone to hear he'd been killed. But when Mendoza asked about specific vehicles linked to the laundering probe, Rivas deflected. I run a legitimate business. Detective cars move fast. Papers get shuffled. Maybe Victor made a mistake. I can't babysit every mechanic. The conversation left Mendoza uneasy. Rivas wasn't nervous, but he was too polished. To rehearsed, she had seen it before. The look of a man who had played this game for years and thought he was untouchable. Pressure builds back at the precinct. Mendoza's captain warned her to tread carefully. The feds are sniffing around. Last thing we need is to step on their toes, work the homicide angle. Let them worry about the bigger fish, but Mendoza knew better. Delgado's murder wasn't an isolated homicide. It was a thread dangling from a larger tapestry, pulled too hard, and the whole thing might unravel the second body then. Just as the case threatened to stall, another body dropped on May 2nd. LAPD responded to a call near Griffith Park. A man in his 30s was found in the trunk of a burned-out sedan. His fingerprints identified him as Luis Ortega, a former employee of Sunset Imports. Ortega had gone missing 3 weeks earlier around the same time. Delgado was murdered. The cause of death: 2 bullets to the chest. Execution style. Mendoza's gut tightened. 2 men tied to the same dealership. Both silenced within weeks. The message was clear. Someone was cleaning house. The cartel connection through informants and back-channel whispers. A name surfaced: El Galoa, mid-level cartel lieutenant, rumored to run operations out of East LA. Real name unknown, but his nickname carried weight on the streets. He was known for discipline, precision, and making problems disappear without a trace. Informants suggested that Rivas, the dealership owner, wasn't just laundering money. He was working directly under El Gallo, moving both cash and product through the dealership's pipeline. Delgado and Ortega, both low-level workers, had likely stumbled onto evidence or refused to play along if true. Then Mendoza was no longer chasing a simple homicide. She was circling the orbit of cartel power, where bodies were expendable, and law enforcement interference was met with violence. Personal stakes. Late one night, after reviewing files for hours, Mendoza drove home through downtown. As she pulled into her driveway, she noticed a black SUV idling at the corner. Its headlights switched off the moment she glanced in the rearview mirror. The next morning, she found a folded note under her windshield wiper. 5 words, written in bold marker: "Stop digging, or you're next." It wasn't the first threat of her career, but it was different this time. It wasn't just her job on the line. It was her life, and if the cartel had marked her, she would have to decide how far she was willing to go, turning point instead of backing off. Mendoza pushed harder. She arranged a meeting with Delgado's sister, Marisol, over coffee in a small Boyle Heights diner. Marisol revealed something she had kept from police 2 nights before he died. "Victor came by my apartment," she said, clutching her son's hand. "He looked scared. He said, 'If anything happens to me, it's because of the cars.' I didn't understand. He told me to look under the floorboard in his room if he didn't come back." When detectives searched Delgado's apartment, they found a hidden envelope taped beneath the floorboards. Inside were photocopies of shipping manifests from Sunset Imports, documents showing inflated prices, fake buyers, and vehicle IDs linked to cartel fronts. Victor Delgado hadn't been a random victim. He had uncovered evidence that could have brought down the entire operation, and for that, he paid with his life. Storm on the horizon. With Delgado's documents in hand, Mendoza finally had proof tying Rivas and his dealership to cartel activity, but exposing the truth wouldn't be simple. The cartel had eyes everywhere, and Mendoza knew that even within law enforcement, there were officers who had been bought and paid for. Every step forward would put her closer to the truth and deeper into danger. And as summer crept closer, Los Angeles braced for what would come next. The Delgado murder was no longer just a homicide case. It was the spark of a war that threatened to pull the city into its darkest chapter yet. By June of 2017, Detective Carla Mendoza's investigation into the death of Victor Delgado had spiraled far beyond a routine homicide. What began as a single execution-style killing now pointed to a sophisticated cartel operation stretching across Los Angeles. Every new lead pulled her further into a world where fear silenced witnesses, money bought loyalty, and death followed those who asked the wrong questions. The heat tightens. The documents hidden in Delgado's apartment gave Mendoza leverage, but they also painted a target on her back. Photocopies of falsified vehicle records tied directly to Sunset imports showed a clear pattern. Luxury cars were being purchased in cash, sold to non-existent buyers, and then exported overseas, each transaction washed dirty money into clean profit. The name El Gallo appeared more frequently. In whispers from informants, he wasn't just a mid-level lieutenant, he was the operational nerve center in East Los Angeles, controlling the money pipeline and ensuring silence through intimidation and bloodshed. But getting to him required going through Daniel Rivas. The dealership owner in Rivas wasn't talking on unexpected Aletha. Break came from an unlikely place, Luis Ortega's widow. Rosa reached out to police, fearful and trembling. She agreed to meet Mendoza in secret. Luis told me things, she whispered in a motel room, lit by a single bulb. He said Mr. Rivas was meeting with someone, a man they all called El Gallo. Luis didn't want to be involved, he wanted to quit then. He disappeared. Rosa handed over a small notebook her husband had kept hidden inside, were scribbled notes, initials and cash amounts. One entry stood out, May 1st, meeting at warehouse. Alameda St. R plus Githa. Very next day, Ortega vanished. His body later discovered in a burned-out car. Mendoza finally had a potential meeting spot. But it wasn't enough for a warrant. She needed eyes on the ground, watching the warehouse over the next week. Surveillance units discreetly monitored the warehouse on Alameda Street. It was an unassuming structure, surrounded by chain-link fencing and graffiti-tagged walls by day. It appeared abandoned by night. Black SUVs and tinted sedans rolled in and out through binoculars. Mendoza watched as men unloaded crates from trucks. Sometimes it was car parts, sometimes sealed boxes. She suspected the shipments contained both drugs and Cassian. June 10th. Surveillance captured something critical. Daniel Rivas himself, shaking hands with a man in a white suit and gold watch. The man's face was blurred in the grainy photos, but street contacts later confirmed this was El Gallo. The cartel lieutenant wasn't a ghost anymore. He was flesh and blood, standing in plain sight. The betrayal, but just as momentum built, the investigation suffered a devastating blow. A planned raid on the warehouse was abruptly canceled. The official explanation was insufficient probable cause. Mendoza knew better. Someone had leaked their operation. Her suspicions hardened when she noticed that Captain Torres, her direct superior, had become unusually cautious. Files she requested went missing, meetings were postponed. And then came the whisper from a trusted colleague. Carla, be careful. Word is, someone upstairs is on their payroll. Corruption inside the department wasn't new, but realizing her own captain might be feeding information to the cartel was a gut punch. It explained how El Gallo always seemed one step ahead. Mendoza in the crosshairs. The pressure turned deadly late one evening. As Mendoza left the precinct, a motorcycle roared past her car. Gunfire erupted. 2 bullets slammed into her driver's side door. Narrowly missing her, she hit the gas, tires screeching. Heart pounding, the shooter vanished into the night. It wasn't just intimidation anymore. The cartel wanted her gone. Her colleagues urged her to step back, but Mendoza refused. If I walk away now, Delgado and Ortega died for nothing, she told them, going undercover knowing official channels were compromised. Mendoza decided to take a risk with the help of Rosa Ortega and a confidential informant. She arranged a sting. Rosa would deliver a fake message, pretending she had documents her late husband had hidden, documents that could incriminate Rivas. The plan was simple: lure Rivas into a meeting, record his words, and flip him against El Gallo. On June 22nd, the trap was set at a diner off Whittier Boulevard. Rosa sat nervously in a booth, clutching a manila folder filled with blank papers hidden nearby. Mendoza and her team listened through a wire when Rivas arrived. He wore the same polished smile. He slid into the booth and leaned forward. "You did the right thing calling me." He told Rosa these papers. They belong to people who don't forgive. Mendoza's pulse quickened. He was admitting knowledge of the documents, knowledge of the operation, but before she could signal the tick, everything unraveled. Gallo steps out of the shadows. The diner's bell jingled. A second man walked in, broad-shouldered, dressed in a cream-colored suit. Rosa's face drained of color. "El Gallo," she whispered. The cartel lieutenant had come in person. He slid into the booth beside Rivas, his voice calm but cold. "If there are documents," he said, fixing Rosa with an icy stare, "they come to me, not him." Mendoza's heart raced. If she moved now, the risk of civilian casualties was high, but waiting meant Rosa's life was in danger. Through her earpiece, her team asked, "Do we move?" Before she could answer, El Gallo leaned back, his tone chillingly casual. "Luis made the mistake of talking. That's why he burned. If you make the same mistake, Senora, you'll burn." To the threat was clear. Mendoza gave the signal. Doors burst open. Officers swarmed the diner. Weapons raised. Chaos erupted as El Gallo and Rivas scrambled. Rivas froze, hands in the air, but El Gallo was faster. He shoved a waitress aside, pulled a gun from under his jacket, and fired. The sound shattered the diner's windows. Mendoza dove for cover as her team returned fire when the smoke cleared. Rivas was in custody, but El Gallo had vanished through the back door, leaving only a trail of shattered glass and blood. Though Rivas was arrested, it was only half a victory. The dealer now faced charges of laundering, conspiracy, and accessory to murder, but without El Gallo, the operation's backbone remained intact. And for Mendoza, the message was unmistakable. She had rattled the cage, but the lion was still loose. Los Angeles was bracing for war. The capture of Daniel Rivas was a breakthrough, but Detective Carla Mendoza knew it was only the beginning. Rivas wasn't the mastermind. He was a middleman, a polished face, laundering blood money through shiny cars and fake invoices. The true power still belonged to El Gallo, the man who had vanished into the night during the diner sting. And in Los Angeles, when a cartel lieutenant disappears, he doesn't just go into hiding. He prepares for war. Breaking Rivas at first, Rivas tried to play the same game he always had, charming, dismissive, and calculated. "You've got nothing on me," he told interrogators, leaning back in his chair as though he were still in his dealership office. But the walls were closing in. The evidence from Delgado's floorboard, Ortega's notebook, and the wire at the diner painted a damning picture. Federal prosecutors circled, ready to level charges that could lock him away for life. Mendoza visited him personally. She placed photos of Delgado, Ortega, and Rosa Ortega's terrified face on the table. "You think El Gallo will protect you?" she asked quietly. "He left you in that diner. He ran while you stood there with your hands up. You're nothing to him. Daniel disposable, just like Delgado, just like Ortega." For the first time, the mask slipped. Sweat beaded on Rivas's forehead. After hours of silence, he finally spoke. "I can give you El Gallo." The hunt through Rivas. Mendoza learned the truth. El Gallo's real name was Sergio Alvarez, a Mexican national who had risen through cartel ranks by mixing old-school ruthlessness with modern strategy. He was rumored to control not just money laundering, but also fentanyl shipments moving through the Los Angeles corridor. According to Rivas, Alvarez was preparing to disappear across the border, but not before tying up loose ends, including Mendoza. "If he leaves, he'll vanish for good," Rivas warned. "You'll never see him again." The tip pointed to a safe house in the industrial outskirts of Vernon, a place where the cartel stored cash and weapons before shipments. It wasn't a guarantee, but it was the best lead they had. The raid on a sweltering July evening. Mendoza rolled with a joint LAPD FBI task force tactical gear, unmarked SU, rifles ready. The operation was swift, battering rams smashing through steel doors, flashbangs echoing through the warehouse inside. Chaos erupted, armed men scattered, exchanging gunfire with agents. Crates toppled, spilling bundles of cash and bricks of narcotics across the concrete floor. In the middle of the mayhem stood Sergio Alvarez. ElGallo.com. Precise, a pistol in his hand. For a moment, his eyes locked with Mendoza's across the warehouse. It was a silent recognition, predator and pursuer. Finally, face-to-face shots rang out. Alvarez fired, wounding an agent. Mendoza returned fire, driving him into the maze of crates. The warehouse became a deadly chessboard. Footsteps echoing, shadows darting, the smell of gunpowder thick in the air. Finally, Alvarez tried to slip out a side door, but Mendoza was faster. She cornered him. Weapon raised. It's over, Sergio, she said. Breath-heavy. Alvarez smirked, as if he had been waiting for this moment. You think cutting off one head kills the snake? He sneered. There will always be another. Mendoza didn't flinch. Maybe, but it won't be you. He moved to raise his weapon, but her shot dropped him before he could pull the trigger. Aftermath. A raid dismantled a major cartel hub. Dozens were arrested, millions in cash seized, and shipments of fentanyl confiscated. Newspapers hailed it as one of the largest blows against organized crime in Los Angeles in recent years. In exchange for cooperation, was placed under federal protection. Though Mendoza doubted he'd ever truly be safe, informants whispered that the cartel had already put a price on his head. As for Rosa Ortega and her son, they entered witness protection, leaving behind the city that had stolen so much from them. Vitor Delgado, the quiet mechanic who had stumbled onto secrets too dangerous, was laid to rest at his funeral. His sister Marisol placed a wrench on his coffin, a symbol of the life he had tried to build. Reflections in the City of Angels. For Mendoza, the victory was bittersweet. She had survived the threats, the ambushes, and the betrayals. But the cost lingered. Her captain, Torres, quietly retired after internal affairs found suspicious financial deposits in his accounts. Trust within the department had been shaken. Driving through Los Angeles one late night, Mendoza looked out at the city lights from a distance. The skyline glittered like a promise, but she knew better than most that beneath the glow were shadows. Gangs, cartels, corrupt officials, and ordinary people caught in the crossfire. Victor Delgado's death had exposed one corner of that darkness, but there would always be more. Justice in Los Angeles, she later said in an interview, isn't about winning once and for all. It's about standing up every day, knowing the fight never ends. The takedown of Sergio Alvarez, known on the streets as El Gallo, sent shockwaves through Los Angeles. Newspapers hailed it as a decisive victory. Television anchors praised the LAPD and federal task force, and officials lined up to call it a turning point in the war against organized crime. But for Detective Carla Mendoza, the celebration felt hollow. She knew the truth. Cartels didn't vanish because one lieutenant fell. They adapted, replaced leaders like pieces on a chessboard, and spread their influence into new corners. Cutting off one head only made room for another to rise. And in Los Angeles, the game never truly ended. The ghost of Delgado. Months after the raid, Mendoza still found herself thinking of Victor Delgado, his quiet life, his determination to change, his desperate act of hiding documents under his floorboards. Those details haunted her in many ways. Delgado was the key to it all. Without his courage, no one would have known about Sunset Imports, Ortega's notes, or El Gallo's warehouse yet. Delgado hadn't lived to see justice served at his sister Marisol's urging. Mendoza attended the dedication of a small community center in Boyle Heights. It bore Victor's name, funded by donations from neighbors who wanted to honor him. Children played basketball in the lot, their laughter echoing where gunfire had once shattered the night. Marisol pulled Mendoza aside, tears brimming. He was just a mechanic, she whispered, but he mattered. Thank you for proving that. Mendoza nodded, though she felt the weight of guilt pressing heavy. Justice had come. Yes, but at a cost. No family should have two. Bear Rivas. In the wind. Daniel Rivas, the polished car dealer turned informant, vanished into federal protection. Rumors spread that he was relocated under a new identity. but whispers in the underworld suggested otherwise. Some claimed he had been spotted in Nevada. Others said Mexico. What Mendoza knew for certain was this: the cartel had placed a price on his head. Informants described hitmen scouring border towns, looking for any trace of him. Rivas had bought his survival by betraying Alvarez, but survival in the cartel's world was temporary at best. Rivas won't last 5 years, one informant told her bluntly. They'll find him, they always do. The department cleans house. Internal affairs moved quietly, but decisively after. Captain Torres's retirement bank records revealed unexplained deposits, offshore accounts, and connections to known cartel associates. Though Torres avoided prison by resigning, the scandal rattled the LAPD. Several other officers faced investigations, and new oversight policies were introduced. Yet for every corrupt officer exposed, Mendoza suspected another still lingered in the ranks. The cartel's money flowed too freely, its reach too long. Trust was the first casualty. In cases like this, Mendoza learned to watch her colleagues carefully, never fully certain who was clean and who had already sold their badge. Rosa, and the witnesses for Rosa Ortega and her young son. Witness protection offered safety, but also exile. She sent Mendoza a letter, once no return address, just a shaky signature. Thank you for listening when no one else would. Luis died scared, but at least people will know why. Tell my boy, when he's older, that his father tried to do the right thing. The letter reminded Mendoza why she fought, not for headlines or promotions, but for people like Rosa and her son, caught in the crossfire of battles. They never chose a new shadow. By late 2018, whispers of a new figure began circulating in East Los Angeles, known only as El Pastor. He was said to be a former cartel priest turned enforcer, blending spiritual rhetoric with ruthless discipline. Informants claimed he was consolidating power in the vacuum left by Alvarez's death, where El Gallo had been sleek and businesslike. El Pastor was charismatic, preaching loyalty as if it were salvation. The message was clear: Los Angeles was entering a new chapter. The players changed, but the game remained the same. Mendoza's reflection one evening, months after the case closed. Mendoza stood on the rooftop of her apartment, looking out at the glittering city from here. Los Angeles looked like a jewel, brilliant, dazzling, a leaf, but she knew better. Behind every light was a shadow. Behind every mansion, a story of greed. Behind every quiet street, the possibility of violence. She thought of Delgado, Ortega, Rosa, even Rivas, all threads woven into the city's vast and bloody tapestry. The crime never ends here, she murmured to herself. Only the names change. And so the Delgado case passed into history, filed away in court records, clipped into newspaper archives, and whispered about in neighborhoods where people still feared speaking too loudly. It was a victory. Yes, but in Los Angeles, victories are fragile. The city's heartbeat is a rhythm of ambition and desperation, of dreams built on shifting ground. From Hollywood Hills to East LA alleys, from gleaming dealerships to burned-out warehouses, the stories continue. Stories of greed, betrayal, corruption, and blood. This was just one of them, because, in Los Angeles, the city of angels, crime is never finished. It only waits for the next chapter. Los Angeles was supposed to breathe easier after the fall of Sergio El Gallo Alvarez. For a brief moment, it did. Crime rates in Boyle Heights dipped, drug shipments slowed, and federal press conferences painted a picture of progress. But in Los Angeles, silence never lasts. Where one empire collapses, another always rises. The whisper of a name. It began as a rumor, no louder than a church hymn. Men in East LA whispered about a preacher who spoke of loyalty, sin, and sacrifice. He wore a collar, carried a Bible, and moved with the presence of someone both feared and revered. They called him El Pastor at first. Law enforcement dismissed the stories as cartel folklore, another alias, another ghost story meant to intimidate rivals. But within months, narcotics detectives noticed a pattern. The supply lines disrupted by Alvarez's fall had reorganized new players, all answering to the same shadowy figure. controlled shipments at the port and, unlike Alvarez, El Pastor wasn't hiding in mansions or flashy clubs. He built his network through backroom sermons, holding court in abandoned warehouses where cartel soldiers knelt, as if in prayer. Mendoza pulled back in detective. Carla Mendoza had tried to step back after the Alvarez case, the politics, the betrayals inside her own department, the weight of loss. It all drove her to request desk duty for a while. She focused on paperwork, background checks, and training recruits. But one evening, Captain Jimenez, Torres's replacement, slid a thin folder across her desk. "Take a look," he said. Inside were crime scene photos. 5 bodies lined up against a graffiti-covered wall, execution style. Each had a rosary draped across their chest. On the wall, scrawled in black paint, were the words, "The shepherd protects his flock." Mendoza exhaled slowly. "El Pastor," she said, almost to herself. Jimenez nodded. "We think he's consolidating everything Alvarez left behind, but he's not just running drugs. He's building something else, something bigger, a different kind of leader." What made El Pastor dangerous wasn't just his brutality, was his belief system. Survivors of his sermons described him as part priest, part general. He preached discipline, calling his men a flock, demanding loyalty not through money, but through faith. "He tells them they're soldiers of God," one terrified informant explained. "He says the streets are the devil's playground, and only through him can they be saved." The mixture of cartel violence and religious zeal made El Pastor unpredictable. Where Alvarez had relied on greed, El Pastor tapped into devotion. His men weren't just employees, they were believers. Rosa's shadow returns through federal channels. Mendoza learned that Rosa Ortega, the widow who had helped bring Alvarez down, was struggling in her new life, despite witness protection. She felt the walls closing in. El Pastor asks about her. One agent admitted he talks about punishing traitors somehow. He knows her name. Mendoza's chest tightened. Rosa had already lost her husband, Luis. Now her son's safety hung in the balance again. "You can't let her get caught in this," Mendoza told the agent firmly. "She did her part. She deserves peace." But peace, in Los Angeles, was always temporary. And inside betrayal. Weeks later, a surveillance van outside the port caught footage of a clandestine meeting. A shipping container swung open, revealing crates not just of drugs, but military-grade weapons. The agents tracked the deal until a single familiar face stepped into view, an LAPD officer, still in uniform, carrying a clipboard too. Authorized the cargo's release. Mendoza felt her blood run cold when the still image crossed her desk. Corruption hadn't ended with Torres. El Pastor's reach was already sinking into the department. "This is how it starts," she whispered from the inside out. The shepherd's message. Late one night, as Mendoza drove home through quiet streets, she noticed something slipped under her windshield wiper. A folded pamphlet. On the front was an image of a lamb beneath a cross. Inside, scrawled in neat handwriting, were the words, "Detective Mendoza, every shepherd knows the wolves stop hunting, or the flock will come for you." Her hands trembled slightly as she read it. El Pastor didn't just know about her. He wanted her to know. He knew it wasn't just a threat, it was an invitation. The city of Los Angeles was changing. Where El Gallo's empire had been a machine of money and fear, El Pastor's was shaping into something darker, something built on ideology. For Detective Mendoza, the battle she thought she had ended was only beginning again. This time against an enemy who didn't just want power, but faith, obedience, and blood sacrifice. Los Angeles had seen cartels before, brutal, violent, greedy, but El Pastor's rise was different. His empire didn't grow through fear alone. It spread like a gospel. Every sermon brought new soldiers. Every street corner became a pulpit, and every killing carried a message. The city was learning that El Pastor wasn't just another drug lord. He was a prophet of blood. The flock gathers. By spring of 2019, detectives began noticing a symbol spray-painted across alleyways in Boyle Heights and Echo Park. A black cross with a lamb painted beneath it. To the untrained eye, it was nothing, but to the streets, It was a warning: if you see that lamb, it means the block belongs to him. An informant whispered. Within weeks, gangs that had once fought viciously over corners and narcotics surrendered territory. Without a shot fired, they weren't defeated, they were converted. El Pastor promised stability, money, and a twisted kind of salvation for young recruits with nothing but despair. His words were scripture. Mendoza in the crosshairs. Detective Carla Mendoza knew she couldn't ignore him. Every lead, every informant pointed back to the same man, yet the deeper she pushed, the more personal it became. One night, she returned home to find her apartment door unlocked. Inside, nothing was stolen, nothing was broken, only a single object lay on her kitchen table: a rosary. Black beads glistening under the light. Tied to it was a note, written in the same hand as the pamphlet she'd found weeks earlier. Even wolves can pray, join us, or be hunted. Her pulse quickened, but fear hardened into resolve. El Pastor wasn't hiding anymore. He was daring her. Rosa, in hiding far from Los Angeles. Rosa Ortega lived under a new name in a modest suburb. She tried to raise her son quietly, keeping him away from memories of blood and betrayal. But Rosa's safety was an illusion. In late May, a suspicious vehicle was spotted idling near her neighborhood. The plates traced back to a rental car in San Diego, East, under a fake name connected to a cartel operative. The marshals moved her again, further inland. Rosa wept as she packed her few belongings. He won't stop, she said. El Pastor won't let me live. Her words reached Mendoza through official channels, cutting deep. Rosa had already lost everything once. Now she was losing what little piece she had left. Corruption exposed. The investigation into port activity revealed something worse than smuggled weapons. Documents traced back to several city contracts, waste management, construction permits, even public housing projects, showing signs of cartel laundering. Embedded within those deals were signatures of city officials. When reporters caught wind, whispers of corruption at City Hall spilled into the headlines. The public saw scandal, but Mendoza saw El Pastor's blueprint. He wasn't just running drugs, he was burrowing into Los Angeles. Foundations, politics, contracts, institutions. He was turning the city itself into his flock, the shepherds. Sermon on a humid June evening. Federal surveillance finally caught footage of El Pastor himself. The video, taken from a drone, showed him inside a dimly lit warehouse. Dozens of men knelt before him. Heads bowed, he stood at a makeshift altar, half cross, half cartel banner. His voice carried through the grainy audio feed. The world belongs to the strong. The sheep who follow me will inherit the streets. Those who betray the flock will be slaughtered, for I am the shepherd, and Los Angeles is my pasture. The words chilled Mendoza. Unlike Alvarez's smug businesslike arrogance, El Pastor radiated conviction. This wasn't a man chasing money, this was a man chasing destiny. A dead informant. 2 weeks later, a source inside El Pastor's organization agreed to meet Mendoza behind a strip mall in Montebello. He promised to bring proof of shipments, documents that could connect the flock to Mexican suppliers. But when Mendoza arrived, she didn't find a living witness, she found a body. The man was slumped in his car. A bullet through his forehead. On the passenger seat lay a Bible, opened to Psalm 23, "The Lord is my shepherd." Mendoza's fists clenched. The message was clear. El Pastor knew about her meeting before she even arrived. His reach wasn't just wide, it was inside her. Circle Los Angeles was on the edge once more. Where one empire had fallen, another was already standing taller, stronger, hungrier. Detective Carla Mendoza had thought she had seen the worst with El Gallo, but El Pastor was proving to be something new, something more terrifying. Not just a cartel boss, not just a criminal, a shepherd with a flock ready to kill for him. And in the City of Angels, the lambs were already bleeding. Los Angeles was suffocating under El Pastor's shadow. Every week brought fresh headlines: drug seizures, unexplained disappearances, graffiti symbols multiplying like warnings across neighborhoods. And yet, despite the bloodshed, fear kept witnesses silent. The city was learning the hard way. El Pastor wasn't just another cartel boss. He was a movement building the task force after weeks of pressure. Federal agencies agreed to form a joint task force dedicated to dismantling Al Pastor's Network D, ATF, and LAPD detectives were pooled together under one umbrella. Detective Carla Mendoza was drafted immediately. She resisted at first. Memories of Delgado, Rosa, and the betrayals within her own department still haunted her. But Captain Jimenez pressed hard. "You know his patterns. You've seen how he moves," he told her without you. "This case goes nowhere." Reluctantly, she agreed. For Mendoza, it wasn't about duty anymore. It was personal. The port lead. The breakthrough came when a longshoreman tipped the D about unusual container movements at the port of Los Angeles. Certain crates bypassed inspections with rubber-stamped signatures, moving directly to private warehouses. The tip was dangerous, but it aligned with what Mendoza suspected. El Pastor's flock had infiltrated the dock. Surveillance teams tracked a container to an industrial lot in Vernon. From the outside, it looked like any other warehouse. Rusted walls, security fencing, a line of parked trucks, but inside, agents believed, lay the first solid chance to strike. A whisper of betrayal as plans for the raid formed. Mendoza received a late-night call from a source in East LA. The voice was shaky. "Urgent. They know," he whispered. "Al Pastor knows about the port. Someone on your team is feeding him." Mendoza froze. Betrayal again. It was Torres all over. But when she asked for names, the line went dead. The warning echoed in her mind. If El Pastor expected the raid, it wouldn't just fail, it would be a massacre. The warehouse raid on a hot July night. The task force rolled in black SUVs, armored trucks, and tactical teams surrounded the warehouse. Mendoza rode in the lead vehicle, adrenaline burning in her veins. "Move, move, move," the commander barked as agents stormed the gates. The doors crashed open, revealing rows of crates stacked high. For a moment, the warehouse seemed deserted, silent to silent. Then the gunfire started. Shadows emerged from behind the stacks. Dozens of armed men, faces painted with black crosses. They fired with military precision, forcing agents to dive for cover. The air filled with smoke, bullets tearing through wood and metal. Mendoza crawled behind a forklift, drawing her sidearm across the floor. She saw one of the flock advancing, shouting prayers as he fired. "This is God's will." The man screamed before a bullet dropped him. The shepherd's presence as the firefight raged. A voice rose above the chaos, calm, steady, almost soothing. "Brothers, do not fear death. The shepherd is with you." Mendoza's blood ran cold. El Pastor was there through the smoke. She glimpsed him tall, wearing a dark clerical collar. He moved with deliberate steps, unhurried, as if the gunfire around him were nothing more than rain. He raised a hand, signaling his men to fall back, and like disciplined soldiers, they obeyed, retreating into the shadows of a side exit. By the time agents cleared the warehouse, El Pastor was gone. Only the dead and wounded remained. The raid was officially declared a success. Crates of cocaine, assault rifles, and smuggling documents were seized. Reporters hailed it as the first major blow against the flock, but Mendoza knew better. They had walked into a trap. The cartel had been ready. The losses were heavy. To agents dead, 5 more wounded, and El Pastor had slipped away, untouched, his legend only growing stronger. At the morgue, as Mendoza stood over the body of a fallen officer, guilt pressed heavy on her chest. She thought of the warning call, the betrayal still hidden in her task force. Someone close had tipped him off, and until she found them, every step forward would be Shadowdros's fears realized. Meanwhile, Rosa Ortega received another letter at her safe house. This one wasn't from her protectors. It was slid under her door in the dead of night. It was a pamphlet, identical to the ones El Pastor's flock handed out in Leon. The inside was a single handwritten line. "The shepherd never forgets his lost sheep." Rosa clutched her son close, trembling even hundreds of miles away. El Pastor's reach had found her. The raid at the Vernon warehouse was supposed to cripple El Pastor's network. Instead, it proved one thing: the flock was always one step ahead. For Detective Carla Mendoza, the conclusion was inescapable. Someone inside the task force was feeding him information until she found that traitor. Every operation was doomed to quiet suspicions. After the raid, Mendoza spent long nights reviewing tactical briefings, call logs, and assignments. She wasn't just chasing leads on El Pastor anymore. She was chasing her own colleagues. The task force was small, no more than 30 people, but it only took one leak to turn victory into bloodshed. She watched her teammates closely. In the days after the way certain officers avoided eye contact, the nervous tapping of pens during meetings, the subtle hesitations when El Pastor's name came up, but suspicion wasn't proof, and accusing the wrong person could blow the entire investigation apart. Voice in the dark late one evening. Mendoza's phone buzzed, an unlisted number. She hesitated, then answered. Detective. A male voice said, "You're looking for the wrong enemy." Her breath caught. "Who is this?" "A friend," the voice replied. "Someone who doesn't want to see you buried. El Pastor has eyes on you, on your task force, even on your captain." Mendoza's grip tightened on the phone. "Names, I need names." Silence, then the click of disconnection. The warning left her rattled. Was the caller a genuine source, or just another layer of El Pastor's psychological warfare? Rosa's vanishing safe house. While Mendoza hunted the mole, Rosa Ortega's world collapsed again at her third safe house in less than a year. Rosa tried to live quietly with her son, but one night, she returned from the grocery store to find the door ajar inside. Her belongings were gone, furniture overturned, the walls spray-painted with a single word. Flock. Her protectors were nowhere to be found. The marshals swore they hadn't moved. Her hit meant one chilling thing. El Pastor had infiltrated even the witness protection program. Rosa and her son were forced into emergency relocation. Moved in the middle of the night, with no notice. Rosa wept as they drove through dark highways, clutching her son close. "They'll never stop chasing us," she whispered. Following the money, Mendoza shifted focus. If she couldn't find the traitor through behavior, maybe she could find them through greed. She requested financial audits on everyone in the task force, credit histories, sudden purchases, offshore transfers, anything unusual. 2 names surfaced. One, an LAPD officer who had suddenly paid off a $70,000 debt. Another, a federal agent whose wife had purchased a luxury SUV in cash. Both had excuses. Both looked clean on paper, but Mendoza knew paper could be forged. She kept digging the parking lot encounter one night. After another 14-hour shift, Mendoza walked toward her car. In the precinct garage, the lot was nearly empty, the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead. That's when she heard footsteps slow, deliberate. She spun, hand on her gun. A figure emerged from the shadows, a man in plain clothes, holding a pamphlet with the Lamb Cross symbol. He tossed it to her feet. "El Pastor says, you're close," he said, "but the closer you get, the sooner you'll die." Before she could react, the man sprinted toward the exit. She gave chase, but by the time she reached the street, he was gone, vanished into the city night. When she picked up the pamphlet, her heart sank. On the inside, written in bold ink, were the names of her parents and the street they lived on. The flock wasn't just threatening her. They were circling her family. The breakthrough 2 days later. The financial records came back with an update. One of the flagged officers, the federal agent with the luxury SUV, had a brother in Tijuana with documented cartel ties. It was the first concrete link. Mendoza brought the evidence to Captain Jimenez. "It's him," she said. "He's the leak. He's been selling us out." Jimenez looked grim. "Then we need to move carefully. If El Pastor knows we're onto his man, he'll burn him before we can flip him for Mendoza." The next step was clear. Catch the traitor alive and make him talk. The walls of the task force room seemed closer than usual. Coffee cups stacked in corners, case files spread across long tables, and the faces of exhausted agents staring back at one another. Detective Carla Mendoza could feel it. Paranoia had seeped into the air like smoke. No one trusted anyone, not anymore, because somewhere in that room sat the traitor. "Set up, Captain." Jimenez authorized a covert plan the suspected agent, one whose wife had purchased the SUV, wasn't told he was under watch instead. The task force leaked false intelligence, a staged shipment at the port, supposedly containing weapons bound for El Pasto if the flock moved on it. They'd know their traitor had taken the bait. Mendoza volunteered to run point. "I want to see his reaction myself," she told him, and as the sting via false intel was barely 12 hours old, when cartel soldiers hit the staged shipment, masked men stormed the port container, only to find nothing but empty crates and waiting surveillance cameras captured the whole thing moments later. Mendoza and her team stormed the suspect's apartment. The agent Marcus Hale, 39, with a spotless federal record, was sitting calmly at his kitchen table, sipping coffee. He didn't look surprised. The interrogation in the sterile interview room. Hale sat across from Mendoza, hands cuffed to the table. He smiled faintly, as though he'd been waiting for this moment. "You think you're smarter than him?" Hale asked softly. "No one outsmarts the shepherd." Mendoza leaned in, her voice cold. "How long have you been feeding him?" Hale's smirk widened. "Long enough, since the beginning. Every raid, every name, every plan. You handed it to me, and I handed it to him, and still, you couldn't stop him." Mendoza's fists clenched, but she forced herself to stay calm. "Why? Money? Fear?" Hale shook his head. "Faith." He leaned closer, lowering his voice. "You don't understand. El Pasto isn't just a man, he's a prophet. He's going to cleanse this city, detective, and you're just another sinner, waiting for judgment." The words chilled Mendoza more than any threat. Hale wasn't bribed. He was converted. Rosa's terror that same night. Rosa Ortega's temporary safe house was breached. The marshals guarding her were found bound and gagged. Alive but humiliated, Rosa and her son, however, were untouched instead. The intruders left behind a chilling gift, a child's stuffed lamb. Its eyes sewn shut. Pinned to it was a note written in the same neat script as before. "The shepherd protects the children of the flock. Yours will be spared if you return." Rosa sobbed when she saw it. They weren't trying to kill her, they were trying to pull her back in Hale's fate, back in Los Angeles. Hale was transferred to a secure holding facility, but before prosecutors could move him into federal custody, the Flock-A convoy transporting Hale was ambushed on the 110 freeway. Masked gunmen opened fire, disabling the armored vehicle in seconds. By the time backup arrived, Hale was gone, dragged out of the wreckage like a rescued saint in the asphalt. The cartel left a final message, spray-painted in blood-red letters across the highway divider. "The shepherd never abandons his flock." Mendoza's breaking point, when news of the ambush reached her. Mendoza's fury boiled over all those weeks of work, all the danger Rosa had endured, all the blood spilled at the warehouse, and now the traitor had been pulled right out of their hands, welcomed back into the arms of the man who had orchestrated it. Aileen, her apartment that night. Mendoza stared at her reflection in the mirror, exhaustion etched into her face. "You can't win this," she whispered. "Not like this." But then she thought of Delgado, of Rosa, of the dead officers whose coffins she had followed in slow, mournful processions. Shane knew she had no choice. The rain came down hard that night. A rare storm over Los Angeles streets glistened beneath flashing police lights, and thunder rolled across the basin like the drumbeat of War Detective. Carla Mendoza knew it wasn't just weather, it was a sign, because El Pasto had just made his first move against Hertha. Call it was close to midnight when her phone rang. The voice on the other end wasn't dispatch, wasn't Jimenez, wasn't Rosa, it was her younger sister, Valeria. "Carla?" Valeria's voice cracked. Trembling, "Something's wrong. Someone was outside the house. I think they left something on the porch." Mendoza froze. Her sister had nothing to do with this case. She'd been careful to keep her family out of it. Or so she thought. "Don't touch it," Mendoza ordered. "I'm coming right now." The gift on the porch when she arrived. Patrol cars already circled Valeria's modest East LA home. Neighbors peeked nervously through curtains. Whispering on the porch, sat a small wooden box hand with a lamb etched into the lid. Mendoza's stomach twisted inside, wrapped neatly in white cloth. was a bloodied badge number 4317. It belonged to Officer Perez, one of the guards killed during the warehouse raid. There was no note this time, just a badge, a message that didn't need words. "We know who you are. We know who your family is." Valeria's for Mendoza held her sister close inside the living room, promising it would be okay. But Valeria's eyes told a different story, wide, terrified, the kind of fear that doesn't fade with reassurances. "They knew my name," Valeria whispered Carla. "They called me earlier tonight," said the shepherd watches over all lambs. Then they laughed. Mendoza felt the blood drain from her face. The cartel wasn't threatening her anymore. They were threatening everyone she loved. Jimenez's frustration back at headquarters. Captain Jimenez slammed his fist against the wall. "This is a goddamn circus. They've made it personal. Now, he's baiting us." Mendoza stood silent, watching the rain streak across the station's windows. She wasn't thinking about strategy. She was thinking about Valeria's voice, cracking with terror. Jimenez noticed Carla. "Listen, if you want out, say the word, no shame in it. You've done more than enough." Mendoza's response was ice. "No, he came after my family. That means I don't stop until I put him in the ground." The sermon. Nights later, El Pastor broadcast another sermon. The video appeared online, hijacked onto multiple social platforms. He stood in his pulpit, robes immaculate, voice calm, as scripture behind him knelt Marcus Hale, free and unshackled. "Like a loyal disciple," returned the shepherd, "protects his flock," El Pastor intoned. "But the wolves in uniform still hunt us. They desecrate our faith, call us criminals, yet spill more blood than any of us. They do not understand. Faith cannot be chained. Truth cannot be silenced." He raised Hale's hand into the air. "Even those who once strayed can be redeemed. The shepherd never abandons his lambs." Then his eyes calm, piercing, full of conviction, locked with the camera. "To the false detective who seeks to scatter my flock, the shepherd sees your sins, and the shepherd will not forgive." Rosa's dilemma, the safe house. Rosa Ortega trembled as she watched the broadcast. Her son clutched her arm, whispering, "Mama, is he talking about us?" Rosa wanted to reassure him, but she couldn't. The shepherd's words weren't vague anymore. They were targeted. Later that night, Rosa confessed to Mendoza during a hushed phone call. "He'll never stop. You think this is about arrests, about trials? No, to him, this is holy war, and in holy war, there is no compromise." The drive-by the next evening, as Mendoza drove home from the precinct, a black SUV trailed her. She noticed it in the rearview mirror, shadowing every turn. Her instinct screamed. She gripped the wheel tighter at the next intersection. The SUV's window rolled down. A muzzle flashed. Bullets tore into her car, shattering glass, screaming metal. Mendoza ducked low, swerving violently, tires screeching against wet asphalt. She rammed the car into an alley, sparks flying as she clipped a dumpster. The SUV roared past, then vanished into the storm. Her car smoked, riddled with bullet holes. Somehow, she was alive, but the message was clear. Next time, you won't bait. Detective Carla Mendoza sat in the dim glow of the task force war room, eyes fixed on a wall of photographs, mugshots, surveillance stills, street maps riddled with red circles. Faces of the flock stared back at her, like ghosts. She knew what everyone else in that room was thinking. They were losing the proposal. "I want in," Mendoza said flatly. "Captain." Jimenez looked up from the table, blinking in. "What the hell are you talking about?" "I want to infiltrate the flock, get close enough to Pastor, to see how he moves, who he trusts. We're blind out here. Cap, he's feeding us scraps while he stays 10 steps ahead. The only way to beat him is from the inside." The room went silent. One of the FBI agents shook his head. "That's suicide. You've seen what happens to infiltrators. They don't come out." Mendoza's jaw clenched. "They've already come for my family, my sister, Rosa. Even me on the damn freeway. This is the only way to end it before he escalates again." Jimenez slammed his pen down. "Carla, listen to yourself. You go under. You won't just be risking your life, you'll be feeding his paranoia." If he even smells suspicion, I'm already marked, she interrupted. So what difference does it make? The transformation within days. The plan was in motion. The FBI's deep cover unit built her a new identity. Isabella Cruz, an ex-con from Bakersfield, with a record of smuggling and ties to cartel affiliates. They burned the edges of the story, just enough to make it real. False parole papers, fake tattoos etched onto her skin, and a backstory of betrayal by rival gangs. Remember? Her handler warned. They don't recruit, they convert. You'll have to convince them you believe. If you don't, they'll see it. Mendoza nodded, but deep down, she wasn't sure belief could be faked. The first contact he'd started in a rundown church basement in Boyle Heights. The flock held open meetings there, sermons disguised as support groups. Mendoza walked in wearing ripped jeans, a hoodie, and a hard stare. Dozens of faces turned toward her, men, women, even teenagers, each one marked by devotion. At the pulpit stood Marcus Hale, the traitor, smiled like a priest, welcoming a lost sheep. Welcome. Sister, the shepherd is glad you've come. Mendoza's stomach nodded, but she forced a smirk. Heard this was the place to find people who don't scare easy. Hale chuckled. You heard right. The initiation, the night's sermon, wasn't scripture, it was indoctrination. Holly spoke of betrayal, of corrupt systems, of a shepherd who offered truth. His words flowed like honey, sweet and poisonous. At the end, he called new faces forward. Mendoza stepped into the circle, heart pounding. Tell us, Sister Hale said, eyes boring into hers. Why do you seek the shepherd? She had rehearsed the line 100 times. Because the world chews people like me up and spits us out. I'm tired of being a lamb for slaughter. I want to belong to a flock that fights back. For a long moment, silence, then Hale, the shepherd welcomes the broken. Welcome home. Isabella. The flock erupted in cheers, arms raised like worshippers. Mendoza forced herself to lift her hands too, even as bile rose in her throat. Rosa's warning that night. Mendoza called Rosa Ortega from a burner phone. They bought it. Mendoza whispered, I'm inside. Rosa's voice cracked with terror. Carla, you don't understand. Once you're in, they don't let you go. The shepherd doesn't just control them with fear. He fills the holes in their lives, makes them believe he's all they need. That kind of faith, it's stronger than chains. Mendoza exhaled slowly. Then I'll have to play the believer long enough to get close. Rosa's reply was a whisper. Just don't forget who you really are. The blood oath. 2 nights later, Hale summoned Mendoza and 3 other recruits to a warehouse on the edge of Vernon. Candles flickered against stained walls. The air reeked of sweat and gasoline. This is your baptism, Hale announced, to join the flock. You must prove loyalty. A man was dragged out, a trembling junkie, accused of stealing from the cartel. His hands were bound, his face swollen from beatings. Hale handed Mendoza a knife. The shepherd doesn't keep wolves among his lambs, Hale said. Show us you're ready. Mendoza froze, heart hammering. She couldn't kill an innocent, not here. Not like this. But if she hesitated, her cover would shatter. She stepped forward, pressing the blade to the man's throat, then twisted it suddenly, slicing only his restraints. The man collapsed to the ground, sobbing. The room went still. Hale's eyes narrowed. Then, slowly, he clapped. Mercy, he said softly. The shepherd values mercy. To you've chosen well. Relief flooded Mendoza. But she knew this was just the beginning. Los Angeles wore its usual disguise that night. Neon signs blinked along cracked boulevards. Laughter spilled from corner bars, and music thumped from lowrider speakers, cruising down Whittier Boulevard. But beneath the noise, beneath the lights, a different rhythm pulsed. Hidden heartbeat of fear and devotion. That rhythm belonged to the flock and Detective Carla Mendoza, now living as Isabella Cruz was, walking straight into it. The rise of a new lamb. Weeks passed since her blood oath test in the Vernon warehouse. Mendoza had played her part carefully, quiet when she needed to be, fierce when provoked, always willing to carry out the flock's small tasks without question. She transported stolen goods across neighborhoods. She sat in on meetings where coded messages were passed in folded hymnals. She even attended candlelit vigils for fallen flock members, where grown men wept like children as El Pastor's sermons played on battered televisions. The deeper she went, the clearer it became. These weren't just cartel foot soldiers, they were true believers. Broken people reforged into zealots, and she was learning their language, how they prayed, how they obeyed, how they justified bloodshed as purification. Marcus Hale, the traitor agent, had become her sponsor inside the group. His approval carried weight whenever suspicion brushed against her. He smoothed it away with a laugh, a story, or a reminder that the shepherd had a plan for every lammet, was working to welve an invitation one night, after a sermon in a warehouse thick with incense and sweat. Hale approached her with something different in his eyes. "The shepherd wants to see you," he said. Mendoza's chest tightened. She had prepared for this moment, but preparation and reality were two different storms. "Why me?" she asked, masking her nerves with a hardened scowl. Hale grinned. "Because you're loyal, because you're hungry, and because the shepherd sees in you what the world never did. He wants to know you to test you himself." It wasn't a choice when the shepherd called. You went to sanctuary. The meeting place wasn't a church this time. It was an abandoned textile factory near the river. The outside looked deserted, but inside it was transformed into something terrifyingly rows of pews stolen from forgotten chapels lined the concrete floor. Walls were covered with murals, lambs and wolves, angels and fire. Painted in harsh red strokes at the far end stood a raised pulpit fashioned from repurposed scaffolding, draped in white cloth, and there he was, Pastor, the man who haunted case files and whispered rumors, who sent detectives into early graves, who ruled not with money but with faith. He wasn't the monster she had imagined, not physically. He was calm, composed, dressed in a simple white suit. His beard was trimmed neatly, his eyes warm. He looked less like a criminal and more like a healer, and maybe that was the secret. Monsters that look like monsters are easy to spot. Monsters who smile while they cut you open are the dangerous ones. The conversation went. The sermon ended, and the flock dispersed. Hale led Mendoza to the pulpit. "El Pastor," Hale said, bowing his head, "this is Isabella Cruz." The shepherd studied her in silence. His gaze felt like an X-ray, searching deeper than flesh. "So," he said finally, voice smooth and measured, "this is the lamb who chose mercy." Mendoza stiffened. "The test, the knife." He knew. "I believe mercy has power," she said carefully. "Killing that man would have made me no different from the wolves." The shepherd smiled faintly. "And yet, you stand here among wolves, do you not?" Mendoza met his gaze. "Maybe, or maybe I stand among lambs who learned to bite back." For a long moment, silence. Then El Pastor laughed softly, clapping once. "Interesting, very interesting. The world calls us criminals, but you see what we really are." Mendoza forced herself to nod inside. Her heart hammered. The test of faith. The shepherd gestured to Hale. A young boy, barely 16, was brought forward, his hands bound. "This lamb was caught stealing from the flock," El Pastor explained. "He betrayed his brothers and sisters. What should we do with him, Isabella?" The question wasn't casual. It was a blade, sharp and deliberate. Mendoza's throat tightened. The boy's eyes were wide with terror. She couldn't order his death, but if she begged for his life, she might expose herself. She took a slow breath. "If he's truly one of us, then he needs guidance, not punishment. A lamb that strays can still return to the flock." The shepherd's eyes narrowed, searching her face. Then he nodded slowly. "Mercy. Again, twice now. You've chosen mercy." He leaned closer, voice low. "That makes you dangerous, Isabella. Dangerous and useful. Rosa's nightmare." Meanwhile, Rosa Ortega sat awake in her safe house, watching the shepherd's latest sermon play on a loop. His voice was soft, reassuring, almost gentle. She hated herself for understanding why people followed him. "Do you see, Mama?" her son whispered. "He doesn't sound evil. He sounds nice." Rosa pulled him close, tears filling her eyes. "That's how he gets them. That's how he gets everyone." And she prayed harder than ever. that Mendoza would survive whatever game she had just stepped into. The city never slept, but sometimes it felt like it held its breath. That was how Detective Carla Mendoza, living as Isabella Cruz, experienced Los Angeles. Now every street corner, every face in the crowd, every stray glance carried weight. The city had become a stage, and she was playing the most dangerous role of her life inside the flock. She was no longer a nameless recruit. Her mercy at the initiation had set her apart to them. It wasn't weakness, it was a sign, and El Pastor, the shepherd himself, seemed intent on drawing her deeper into his orbit. But every time she looked in the mirror, she saw less of Carla Mendoza and more of Isabella Cruz, a ghost of who she used to be Rosa's fear at the safe house. Rosa Ortega was unraveling. She clutched the edge of a table, voice trembling as she pleaded with a U.S. Marshal. "You don't understand, she's too deep. The shepherd doesn't let people walk away if he's taken her in. He'll break her, twist her, make her believe her son." Curled up in a blanket, whispered Mama. "Is Detective Mendoza gonna be okay?" Rosa forced a smile that never reached her eyes. "She's strong, mijo, stronger than me, stronger than anyone." But later, when the boy slept, she wept into her hands because she knew what it meant to be in the shepherd's world she had once believed too. And belief was harder to escape than any prison cell the task force divide back at headquarters. Tension ran like a live wire. Captain Jimenez studied maps pinned to the wall, satellite photos of warehouses, lists of known flock members, photos of bodies found, burned, beaten, or left with lamb figurines on their chests. San FBI analyst spoke up. "She's gone dark too long. Either she's turned or she's compromised. We need to pull her." Jimenez spun on him. "Pull her? And what then? You think she can just walk away? You think El Pastor shakes her hand and sends her home with a smile? No, if we burn her cover now, she's dead before sunrise." The room fell quiet. Another agent muttered, "Or worse, she comes back to us as one of them." Jimenez didn't answer. He just stared at the board, jaw tight deep down. The fear wasn't that Carla would fail. The fear was that she would succeed so well that even she wouldn't know where Mendoza ended. And Isabella began the shepherd's call 3 nights later. Hale summoned her to a gathering, not a sermon this time. Not a vigil, something heavier. "The shepherd has chosen you," Hale said, voice hushed but reverent. "It's time you stop standing in the outer circle. You're ready for real work." They met in a converted garage behind a shuttered auto shop. Inside, a dozen flock members sat in folding chairs, faces hard, eyes bright, with the fervor of zealots. El Pastor stood at the front, hands clasped, as though in prayer. "My children," he began, his voice calm, almost tender. "We live in a city poisoned by wolves, dealers, corrupt police, false prophets of greed. They think they can poison our streets and slaughter our lambs without consequence." The room murmured in anger. "But the shepherd does not abandon his flock," he continued. "Tomorrow night, we send them a message, a cleansing fire. The target, though. Target was a motel on the edge of East LA. To outsiders, it looked like a forgotten relic. Faded neon, broken windows, a cracked parking lot littered with beer bottles. But inside, it housed rival dealers, men aligned with other cartels, wolves, in the shepherd's narrative. "We will burn them out." El Pastor declared, "a fire so bright the city cannot ignore, and the lamb who carries the first torch will be Isabella." Every head turned toward Mendoza. Her pulse thundered in her ears. She forced herself to nod slowly, masking the dread clawing at her chest. "Yes, shepherd," she said, her voice steady. The room erupted in cheers. Hale leaned close, whispering, "This is your baptism of fire. Don't falter. The shepherd is watching." Mendoza's conflict that night. Back in her assigned safe flat, Mendoza sat on the edge of a cot, staring at the gasoline canister Hale had delivered. Her hands shook as she unscrewed the cap, inhaling the sharp chemical stench she had sworn an oath once to protect, to serve, to save. And now, she was expected to light a match that would slaughter 6 men, maybe more. She couldn't let the massacre happen, but she couldn't blow her cover either. Not yet. Her phone buzzed a burner she had hidden in the lining of her boot, a single coded message from Jimenez's team. "We see movement near the motel. Confirm status." She didn't reply, because there was nothing to confirm. She was no longer watching from outside. She was inside the fire the next night. The garage stank of gasoline, gun oil, and incense. It was an unholy mix, half sacred ritual. Half street warfare. The flock had gathered again, their faces lit by the weak glow of a single hanging bulb. El Pastor stood at the center. Draped in his spotless white suit, he looked like a preacher about to lead a revival, not a warlord about to order a massacre. That contradiction was part of his power. He could make violence sound like salvation. "My children," he said, his voice carrying the calm certainty of prophecy. "Tomorrow the wolves will feel the fire of heaven." He lifted a small glass bottle filled with liquid, swirled it slowly, then set it on a table lined with rags, wires, and lighters. "Each flame you strike," he said, "is a flame struck against corruption, against despair. This is not violence, this is cleansing. Do you believe?" "Yes, shepherd," the flock chanted in unison, voices rising like a choir. Mendoza forced herself to echo the words. Her throat felt tight. The roles Hale handed out assignments. 2 men would be the lookouts. Stationed across the street in a stolen van, a trio of younger recruits would smash windows and throw Molotovs. Hale himself would lead the armed cover, carrying an AK-47 wrapped in black tape end. Then there was her. "The first torch is hers," Hale announced, nodding at Mendoza. "The shepherd has chosen." Some of the flock looked uneasy. A few narrowed their eyes. One woman, her hair cut close and her arms tattooed with scripture verses, stepped forward. "Why her?" she demanded. "She's new. She hasn't bled with us, hasn't killed with us. How do we know she won't hesitate?" The garage grew tense. Eyes darted back and forth, waiting for El Pastor's judgment. The shepherd raised his hand. Silencing the room, he looked directly at Mendoza, his gaze steady, unblinking. "Because hesitation is what the wolves expect," he said softly. "But mercy is not weakness. It is fire waiting to burn. She carries a light the rest of you cannot see. The first torch is hers. Question her again." "And you question me?" The room fell silent. The tattooed woman lowered her head. "Yes." Shepherd Mendoza felt the eyes on her, hot with suspicion and resentment, but she kept her face calm. Even as her stomach twisted, the test Hale approached her later. Once the others were busy preparing bottles and gasoline rags, he pressed a lighter into her hand, his voice low. "You hesitate tomorrow," he said, "and they'll smell it. You understand me? They'll smell it on you like blood in the water." Mendoza nodded slowly. "I won't." Helly studied her. Ben gave a rare smile. "Good, I told the shepherd. You were ready. Don't make me a liar." The motel that night. Mendoza did her own recon. She made an excuse to slip away and circled near the motel under the guise of prayer and reflection. What she saw made her chest ache. The motel was crawling with dealers and musclemen with pistols tucked into waistbands. Women running cash, cars pulling in and out at odd hours. But in between the shadows were innocents, families who couldn't afford rent anywhere else. A mother carrying groceries up the stairs, a kid playing with a soccer ball in the cracked parking lot. If the flock torched the place, the flames wouldn't just consume the wolves, they'd devour the lambs too. And when the police arrived, if they arrived in time, the shepherd would already have the narrative ready. The city ignored the flock, so the flock delivered judgment. She couldn't let it happen. The decision back at her safe flat. She paced like a caged animal. Her burner phone buzzed again with coded check-ins from Jimenez's team. She typed out a reply, then deleted it before hitting send. If she told them everything, the raid would be blown. They'd storm in, sirens blazing, and she'd be exposed. But if she told them nothing, she'd be complicit in whatever bloodbath came next. Finally, she typed a single phrase, "High-risk innocence near target," and then she turned the phone off. The prayer before the fire. The next evening, just before sunset, The flock gathered in the garage one last time. Bottles clinked together in crates, rags soaked in fuel lay stacked in buckets. Weapons gleamed under the dull light. Tell Pastor raised his hands tonight, he said. We do not strike for ourselves. We strike for those who cry out unseen, for the lambs no one protects. The wolves will choke on their own smoke, and the city will know. The shepherd watches the flock, bowed their heads. Some wept openly. Others muttered prayers through clenched teeth. Mendoza kept her eyes shut, whispering a prayer of her own. Though hers wasn't to El Pastor, hers was desperate, silent, and raw. God, don't let me lose myself tonight. Don't let me become what they want me to be. When she opened her eyes, the shepherd was watching her, and he smiled. The convoy 3 vehicles rolled out into the night. A battered van, a pickup loaded with crates, and a black sedan carrying El Pastor himself. Mendoza sat in the back of the pickup, clutching the canister and lighter. Hale had given her the wind, whipped her hair, carrying the smell of gasoline from the crates at her feet. Every streetlight they passed felt like a countdown. Every mile closed the gap between survival and damnation. She looked at the other recruits beside her, painted with grim determination, hands shaking with anticipation. To them, this wasn't just an attack, it was scripture made flesh to her. It was the edge of a knife. The convoy parked a block away from the motel, engines rumbling low before cutting to silence. The night was heavy, humid, the kind that pressed down on the lungs and made every sound carry farther than it should. Mendoza stepped out of the pickup, her boots crunching on broken glass scattered along the gutter. The lighter in her pocket felt like a brand against her thigh. Ahead, the motel sat like a dying beast, neon sign flickering, windows cracked, shadows moving behind torn curtains on the second floor. Laughter spilled out from an open door, crude and mocking below. A child's bicycle leaned against the stair rail, her chest tightened positions. Hale ordered, voice clipped. He pointed to recruits toward the van, another trio hefted rags dangling like fuses. He turned to Mendoza. You first, the shepherd commands. All eyes shifted to her again, the chosen one. The one meant to spark the cleansing fire. She nodded, her face a mask inside. Her pulse hammered the first torch. They crept toward the motel's edge. Hale kept watch with the AK-47 slung across his chest. The others whispered prayers or muttered curses. Mendoza gripped her canister, sloshing fuel across a ragged bottle. She struck the lighter. A small flame hissed to life, dancing just inches from the soaked cloth. The world seemed to hold still. One flick of her wrist, and she'd crossed the line forever. She thought of Rosa, of her son, of the victims whose faces haunted her nightmares. She thought of the oath she'd sworn, badge heavy in her palm years ago, and then she made her choice. She stumbled deliberately, letting the flame lick too close, scorching the rag too fast. With a hiss, the cloth burned out before she could throw. Damn it, Hale snapped, yanking her back. Do it again. But her hesitation gave her something: time, and in that heartbeat, the motel door banged open. The wolves noticing man staggered out, cigarette dangling from his mouth, a pistol tucked in his waistband. He squinted at the figures in the shadows. Hey, he shouted, who the hell? The recruits panicked. One hurled his Molotov too soon. The bottle smashed against the motel wall. Fire exploding across peeling paint. Screams erupted inside. Chaos descended. Firestorm. The flock surged forward, glass shattering as more Molotovs sailed into rooms. Flames roared to life, licking up the wooden siding. Smoke billowed into the sky. Gunshots cracked from the upper floor. Dealers firing back. Blind and furious bullets sparked off the pavement. One recruit collapsed, clutching his chest as blood spread across his shirt. Go, go, Haley roared, unleashing a burst from his rifle. Windows shattered. Men dove for cover. Mendoza crouched low, adrenaline flooding her veins. She grabbed a second bottle, but instead of throwing it at the motel, hurled it hard into the street. Shattering near a hydrant, flames burst harmlessly on the pavement. Another precious life bought, another risk of exposure taken. Innocence caught through the smoke. She saw them, 2 kids bolting down the stairwell, coughing, eyes wide with terror. A woman screamed for them, trapped on the second floor as flames blocked her door. Mendoza's body moved before her brain could stop it. She sprinted toward the stairwell. Ducking behind a burning support beam, she grabbed the kids, shoving them toward the alley. "Run," she hissed. "Run and don't look back." The little boy stumbled, but she pushed him forward until both disappeared into the darkness from behind. Hale's voice roared, "Isabella, where the hell are you?" She turned, face lit by the glow of the inferno, and forced a snarl. "The wolves' lambs are scattering. I'm driving them into the fire." Hale grinned savagely, believing her, but she knew the truth. She had just saved them from it. The shepherd watches amid the chaos. The black sedan pulled up, doors opened, and out stepped El Pastor himself. His white suit glowing eerily in the firelight, he walked calmly toward the burning motel. Hands clasped, as though blessing the flames, the flock parted for him. Even in the middle of the firefight, bullets cracked nearby. But he didn't flinch. He stopped in front of Mendoza. Eyes locking onto her. "You lit the fire," he said softly, voice filled with pride. "I can see it in your eyes." Her throat went dry. She wanted to scream the truth that she had sabotaged, saved, resisted, but instead, she bowed her head. "Yes, Shepherd," he touched her cheek gently, the way a father might. "You are chosen tonight, proves it." The escape sirens wailed in the distance. Red and blue lights flashed faintly through the smoke. Police and fire engines were closing in fast. LT. Hallie barked, "Move." The flock scattered to the vehicles. Hale dragged Mendoza by the arm, shoving her back into the pickup. The convoy roared to life, tearing away from the burning motel as gunfire and screams faded into the night. Mendoza twisted in her seat, watching as the building collapsed in flames. She prayed the woman she'd seen had found a way out. She prayed the kids kept running. The shepherd's voice carried from the sedan ahead, amplified by a megaphone. "The wolves burn tonight. The city will remember this cleansing." And behind them, Los Angeles lit up in fire and fury. The motel still burned when the flock vanished into the night. Flames painted the sky orange, smoke coiling upward like a signal to the heavens from miles away. The glow was visible. Another scar on a city already bleeding from too many wounds inside the fleeing convoy. The mood was electric. The recruits whooped and pounded their fists against the truck's metal walls. Hale grinned like a wolf, adrenaline still surging through his veins. "We sent them straight to hell," one of the younger flock members shouted, his face streaked with soot and sweat. "Did you see them scatter?" The shepherd was right. God was with us tonight. Mendoza sat among them, silent. Her hands still smelled of gasoline. Her ears still rang with screams. Every cheer felt like nails hammering deeper into her skull. The shepherd's benediction back at the garage. El Pastor waited. His white suit remained untouched by smoke or ash, as if the inferno itself had spared him when the flock stumbled in. Sweaty and wild-eyed, he raised his arms. "You are blessed," he said, voice calm, "steady tonight." Heaven smiled upon the flock. The wolves burned, and the lambs of Los Angeles know they are not forgotten. The recruits cheered again, their voices echoing in the rafters. Some dropped to their knees, kissing his hands. Others wept openly, overcome by zeal. He turned to Mendoza, his gaze soft but piercing. "And you," he said, "carried the first flame. You lit the path. Do you feel it now? The cleansing power in your heart?" Mendoza forced herself to nod yes. "Shepherd," he smiled, "good, because this city is filled with wolves, and you, Isabella, will be the fire that drives them out." The room erupted once more, chants of her name rising with feverish devotion. "Isabella, Isabella, Isabella." Her stomach turned, but she smiled, because she had the task force watches across town, in the task force command center. The mood was very different. Screens showed live footage of the motel blaze, firefighters battling to contain it, paramedics rushing smoke-choked survivors onto stretchers. Captain Jimenez stood at the center, fists clenched. "How many dead?" he demanded. An analyst replied grimly, still counting. "Preliminary estimate, 3, but at least a dozen injured, mostly not civilians who lived there." Jimenez's jaw tightened. He slammed a fist onto the table. rattling coffee cups and pens. God damn it, another agent said. We tracked her signal. She was there. She was with them. Jimenez turned sharply. And did she throw the first torch? Did she pull the trigger? Silence, the analyst hesitated. We don't know, we only know. She didn't stop it. Jimenez glared. She's still in play. As long as she's in, there's hope. We pull her now, we lose everything, the FBI agent across the room muttered. Or we lose her. Jimenez didn't answer, but in his chest, the weight of that possibility grew heavier. Survivor's guilt the next morning. The motel was nothing more than charred beams and ash. News crews swarmed the site, cameras capturing blackened ruins and dazed survivors wrapped in blankets among them was the boy Mendoza had pushed to safety. His clothes were singed, his face streaked with soot, but he lived. Reporters swarmed him. What happened? Who did this? Through coughs, he whispered. Men with bottles, fire everywhere. A lady told us to run. She saved us. The clip ran on every local broadcast. The city demanded answers, but in the garage. The shepherd smiled as he watched the news. They call it terror, he said softly, but soon they will call it prophecy. Twisting the story that evening, El Pastor addressed the flock again, this time. A small camera crew, loyalists, who ran his underground media network, filmed every word. The wolves sought to poison the lambs with drugs, with violence, with greed. He preached, but the flock rose. The fire was not destruction, it was rebirth. Those who perished were not innocents, they were wolves in lamb's clothing, and even in fire. The shepherd showed mercy. Did he not spare children? Did he not spare the faithful? He turned toward Mendoza. Our sister Isabella saved lambs, even as she burned wolves, proof that God's hand guides her, proof that she is chosen. The camera lingered on her face. She forced herself to look calm, even serene, though inside, she was breaking. When the footage spread online, hours later, comments poured in. Some denounced them as murderers, others, disturbingly many, hailed them as avengers, and, in that flood of noise, the line between criminal and martyr blurred. Mendoza's cracks later, that night, alone in her flat. Mendoza sat on the floor with her head in her hands. Her lighter lay beside her, its metal casing scorched. She could still hear the cries of the trapped woman, still smell the smoke, still feel the heat on her skin. She whispered to herself, "You saved some, you saved who you could," but another voice inside whispered louder, "You also let it happen. You stood there, you played your part." Her phone buzzed again, another coded message from him in his report status. She stared at the screen, tears burning her eyes. Then she typed back, "A live deep cover, Shepherd trusts, mesh." Didn't add the part, clawing at her chest. "I don't trust myself anymore." By morning, the motel fire wasn't just another crime story buried in the back pages. It was the lead. Helicopters buzzed over the ruins. News anchors stood in front of smoldering wreckage, and grieving families clutched photos of loved ones lost. 3 dead, 12 injured. The anchor on Channel 7 reported grimly among the victims, a 62-year-old grandmother, a young father, and a man believed to have ties to local narcotics trafficking. Questions remain. Was this a gang retaliation, or something larger? The camera panned to children coughing in oxygen masks, soot still on their faces. Mendoza watched from a diner television as she nursed a cup of coffee. She couldn't bring herself to drink. Her hands shook so badly she kept them wrapped tight around the mug behind her. 2 men in work uniforms muttered over breakfast, "Damn shame. Cartel wars spilling into our neighborhoods now." One said, "Cartel? Man, this ain't cartel. This is that cult, the Shepherd. You've seen the videos. They're out here burning people alive." Mendoza lowered her gaze, her pulse thudding in her throat. They didn't know she was sitting 3 feet away. The woman praised in those very videos. The task force's fracture at headquarters. The task force was in shambles. Agents crowded around a screen, replaying footage of El Pastor's sermon, now circulating online. His words rang clear. "Our sister Isabella saved lambs, even as she burned wolves, proof that God's hand guides her." An FBI supervisor slammed her fist onto the table. "He's putting her on camera now," She's burned. It's only a matter of time before someone recognizes her. We pull her tonight." Captain Jimenez shot back. "No, the deeper she gets, the closer we get to him. We yank her now. All we have is ashes and bodies. We need the shepherd, not just his scraps." The room buzzed with arguments. Some demanded extraction. Others argued Mendoza was their only shot at dismantling the flock. Finally, Jimenez barked, "Enough." She knew the risks. She made the choice, and until she signals she's out, we keep her in. That's the only way we stop him. But even as he said it, his chest ached, because he wasn't sure if she could come back whole, even if she survived the shepherd's praise that evening. Mendoza was summoned to the shepherd's private quarters. For the first time, the room was nothing like she expected. No lavish throne, no gold-plated symbols, just a simple desk, bookshelves lined with scripture and psychology texts, and a map of Los Angeles pinned to the wall with colored strings crisscrossing neighborhoods. El Pastor sat at the desk, writing in a leather-bound journal when she entered. He gestured to a chair across from him. "You did well," he said quietly, "better than I dreamed." Mendoza kept her face still. "I only did as you asked." He smiled faintly. "Humility, a rare gift in a city of wolves. Do you know why I chose you?" She hesitated. "Because you saw something in me, no?" he said, leaning forward. "Because I saw me in you. I know what it is to doubt, to resist, to carry the weight of both justice and sin. That is why you will go farther than the others. That is why you will lead." Her chest tightened. "Lead?" "Yes," he said. "You think the fire was your test? No, that was your birth. Now comes your trial." Rosa's breaking point hat, the safe house. Rosa Ortega couldn't stand it anymore. She'd seen the news, the children, the bodies, and then she saw Mendoza's face, blurred but unmistakable. In the shepherd's propaganda, she turned to the marshal, guarding her. "You're killing her," she hissed. "Every day you leave her in there. You're letting him twist her into one of his own." The marshal tried to calm her. "Ma'am, she's a professional. She knows what she's doing." "No one knows what they're doing inside his world," Rosa snapped. "I've been there. I know he doesn't break you with fear. He breaks you with love, with belonging. By the time you realize you're already his." She sank into a chair, trembling. "She's not coming back the same, if she comes back at all." The trial 2 nights later. Hale woke Mendoza at dawn. "The shepherd wants you now." She followed him to the garage, where a man was tied to a chair. His face was bruised, blood dripping from his split lip. His eyes darted wildly. "Fear raw and animal. He's a wolf," Hale said simply. "A dealer who refused the shepherd's blessing tonight. He would have sold poison to children, but the shepherd gives you the torch." El Pastor stepped forward, placing a pistol in Mendoza's hand. "You spared once, you burned once, now you must kill once. Not for me, for the flock. For the lambs. Do this, and you will be free of doubt forever." The room held its breath. Every flock member watched her, hungry for proof. Mendoza's fingers tightened on the grip. The man in the chair whimpered, shaking his head. Her heart pounded. This was the line. If she pulled the trigger, she'd never get back. If she refused, they'd smell her betrayal instantly. The gun in her hand, the pistol, felt like molten iron in Mendoza's grip. The shepherd's flock circled the garage like vultures, their faces alight with anticipation. Some whispered scripture, others smirked, eager to see blood spilled in God's name. The man tied to the chair whimpered again. "Please, I don't. Time not." His words broke into sobs. His bare feet scraped against the concrete floor as he tried to shrink into the chair's frame. Marcus Hale stood just behind her, arms folded, his stare burning into the back of her skull. Then came the shepherd's voice, magnetic, terrifying. "Do you hear him, Isabella? The wolf begging to be spared, the serpent pleading not to be crushed. This is what they do, paint themselves as lambs, so that the weak mistake them for innocent. But you are not weak." Mendoza's finger brushed the trigger. Her heart slammed against her ribs like it was trying to break free. She wasn't in a garage anymore. She was in a hospital corridor. Years ago, staring at her father's lifeless body after he'd been gunned down in a drive-by. She was standing over crime scenes littered with teenagers, shot in alleys by men who swore they were soldiers of justice. She was back in every moment that had pushed her to become a cop. Every reason she had sworn to protect instead of destroy, but here she was, holding a gun, about to cross the very line she had spent her career standing guard against, a choice made in silence. She raised the gun, leveled it at the man's forehead. His eyes bulged, tears streaking his bruised face. "Please, senorita, I got kids," her mind screamed. She pulled the trigger. The shot exploded in the enclosed garage. Deafening, the man collapsed against the chair, blood trickling down his temple. The silence that followed was thick, broken only by the ringing in her ears. The flock erupted not in horror, but in applause. Some cheered, others dropped to their knees in worship. Marcus Hale clapped her on the shoulder. "Knew you had it in you." El Pastor smiled, his eyes shining with a twisted pride. "The lamb has become the shepherd." Mendoza's face didn't move, but inside, her soul split. She hadn't shot the man in the head. Her aim had shifted at the last instant, down through the chair's armrest, into the man's shoulder, enough to drop him, to spill blood, not enough to kill the flock. Hadn't noticed they saw blood. They heard the shot. They smelled victory, but she knew, and so did the man, who slumped unconscious. Alive for now. The task force's horror back at headquarters. The task force watched the footage in stunned silence. The shepherd had filmed the execution. His people always filmed everything and uploaded it within hours. There was Mendoza, face shadowed but visible, pulling the trigger. She did it. One agent whispered. She crossed. Another muttered, "She's gone. She's one of them now." Captain Jimenez's jaw was locked tight. He replayed the video frame by frame, analyzing her posture, her aim. He saw it, but enough. The bullet hadn't gone where it should have. "She didn't kill him," he said, voice low. "She missed on purpose." The others stared at him like he was delusional, but Jimenez knew his detective. He saw the subtle shake in her hand, the controlled breath, the angle shift. "She's still fighting," he said firmly. "She's not gone." But even as he said it, he wondered how much more of herself she could sacrifice before the line between survival and surrender vanished. Rosa's silent prayer. Rosa Ortega sat alone in her safe house, the news replaying the execution video on a loop. She turned away, pressing her rosary so tightly in her palm that the beads left indents in her skin. "Mia," she whispered under her breath, as though speaking to Mendoza through the screen. "Don't let him take you. Don't let him make you like the rest of us." Tears blurred her vision. She prayed harder than she had in years, not for her own soul, but for the woman risking hers. The shepherds embraced that night. El Pastor called Mendoza again to his quarters. "You have proven yourself," he said, his smile serene. "I know the hesitation you carry. I saw it in your eyes, but hesitation is not weakness. It is the birth of strength. You will learn that killing is not sin, if it saves the flock." He handed her a chain with a silver pendant shaped like a lamb. "Wear this," he said, "so they know who you are now. My chosen, my blade." Mendoza clasped it around her neck, the cold metal burning against her skin. "Tomorrow," El Pastor continued, "we move against the true wolves. The cartel will bleed, and Los Angeles will know it was the hand of God in you. Isabella will lead the strike." Her blood ran cold. Lead, not follow, not assist. Lead. The noose was tightening, and she was the rope.